Here's a quick update on the tropics, and you'll notice that there's some action out there right now. We've got Joyce showing up. We've also got Tropical Storm Isaac, which is the main player right now down in the Caribbean. This has been kind of an interesting storm, and then it hasn't really intensified. A real broad circulation, but the hurricane hunter is having a tough time finding the center of that circulation. So pinpointing exactly where the storm is right now is somewhat of a question, but it's down there south of Puerto Rico. Get a little closer view of it, and you see the tropical storm points on there. These are the forecast points for it in the observations, and notice a lot of the convection to the south of the center of this storm, or at least where the hurricane center is estimating the center of the storm to be. There's Puerto Rico right in there, and then the island of Hispaniola. So this storm's still kind of fighting it quite a bit. As you look at what's going on today, a lot of the convection that had fired up earlier on is now gone away. So we're still talking about a minimal tropical storm here that is going to be running into some wind shear, pretty good southwesterly wind shear showing up off to the east of the storm over the western part of Hispaniola and Cuba. So we'll see how that plays out. In the real near term, conditions are favorable for some strengthening, but it's just not taking place right now with the storm. We'll see if that happens as it's out over some warm water of the Caribbean in the next 12 to 24 hours. Let's get a look right now at the tracking maps from the National Hurricane Center for both Joyce and for Isaac. And Joyce carrying winds of, we'll look at Joyce first, 40 miles per hour. And eventually, Joyce may have an impact near Bermuda. Bermuda is right in here. It is forecast by early next week to have winds of around 50 miles per hour and be to the south of Bermuda. So they've, of course, seen a lot worse than that on Bermuda. Now, Isaac, and a little jog to the north after northwest after moving west-southwest during the day tomorrow. Again, very difficult for the Hurricane Center to really pin down exactly where the center of this storm is. And as we look at its projected track here, as a hurricane just south of Port-au-Prince, 75 mile per hour winds tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. You know, I don't know, tomorrow evening rather at 8 o'clock. That's about 30 hours from now, and I don't know if this storm has it in it to get to hurricane strength, 80 mile per hour winds in the next 30 hours, based on the fact that right now at 2 o'clock we're still talking about a bare minimum tropical storm with winds of 40 miles per hour. And it moves through the windward passage between Haiti and Cuba, and the track, of course, widening out that cone there as you get through Cuba and into the Bahamas. To the north now, a very low chance that this thing is going to go into the Bahamas at this point. A lot of the computer models are converging on South Florida and then either the western part of Florida or probably more likely now out into the Gulf of Mexico, and winds of 86 miles per hour, the long range forecast with this one Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the morning. Let's go to Google Earth so you can get a look at some of those computer model projections here, and they are now clustered on this track that has the storm over land a lot of the time, at least considering that it is going through the Caribbean. So it hits just about every landmass in its path as it moves from the Dominican Republic to Haiti and then through Cuba, if it follows along the consensus of this storm track here. And then it's right in here in the Gulf of Mexico where we'd be concerned about some strengthening taking place, or at least rapid strengthening with this one. So we can pretty much discount this track, which was from yesterday. This was the NAM, one of the computer models that was showing the potential for this thing to end up in the Bahamas, and that's just not going to be the case in all likelihood right now. Also want to show you about these Hurricane Hunter aircraft that have been flying into this storm, and they've really had a hard time. Let's see if I can bring that up here. There we go. They've really had a hard time pinning down the circulation of this storm. Real broad circulation, but really not a tight and closed circulation on this system. Central pressure there, they're picking up about 1,004 millibars, so not a particularly strong and intense storm right now, but it is fairly broad in scope. The size of it is pretty good, so it could end up being a hurricane in the next 24 to 30 hours. But again, I don't think that's going to be the case, even though that is the official forecast from the Hurricane Center. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's look at some computer models right now, and this is the GFS, and that takes this storm, does intensify it some anyway, and takes it through that area of southern Haiti near Port-au-Prince, and then across Cuba, close to the Florida Keys and off the west coast of Florida, and then up into the panhandle of Florida, or close to the border there with Alabama. With Alabama at some point. This is in the early part of next week, Tuesday evening, and then after that, it just kind of weakens and fizzles out. A lot of the computer projections from earlier were taking the storm up the eastern seaboard and then back out into the Atlantic to our south. Not seeing as much of that though. From the computer models today. Also want to take a look at this European model, which may end up being the big winner as far as Isaac is concerned. All along, it's had Isaac on this low road down through the southern Caribbean, and nothing really has changed with that. It skirts along the southern part of Cuba, and it's not until it makes it out into the Gulf of Mexico that you really start to see some intensification. And this track is even farther west than what the European model has been projecting. But one of the real concerning things here is that once it gets out over the Gulf of Mexico, the European turns this into a very intense storm as it closes in somewhere between Houston and New Orleans, and it could be a major hurricane when it does so if the European computer model does verify. So here's another look, a tighter look at it where we can actually pinpoint what the central pressure is. So you get it down to about 990 as it moves through the warm waters of the Gulf in a threatening position, actually not too far from where Katrina was several years ago out there in the central Gulf of Mexico. And then down to 971 millibars, a major hurricane at that point, and making landfall. And you can't really read it, but it says 963 millibars. That is to the west of New Orleans, a little bit closer to the east, but still west of the city would be a worst-case scenario track for New Orleans, as that brings the strongest winds out of the east, pushes the water into Lake Pontchartrain from the Gulf of Mexico, and causes flooding over the levees. So that's the biggest concern for New Orleans as far as a hurricane track goes. And Houston is right down in here, so this is kind of a concerning track as well for Houston. So if the European verifies, we're talking about a major hurricane that ends up hitting the central Gulf of Mexico. Now, as far as our threat level is concerned, it's just about down into the all clear, where this storm looks like it'll be a non-factor. I think that if anything at this point, there would be some potential for the storm to maybe track to the western panhandle of the western coast of Florida, then up through the panhandle, and then take that curve off to the north and to the east and bring us some rain eventually by about Thursday or Friday of next week. But even that now is looking like somewhat of an unlikely scenario. Right Weather Pro subscribers, I've got your long-range forecast for the next couple of weeks coming up later on this evening.